at reptiles, snakes are king. These are the most popular options most of the time. But there are 5 really bad options that make terrible pets, and I'm going to tell you about those and the 5 better options that are pretty close. My name's Adam, this is Pikachu, you're watching Wickens, and Reptiles, stick around. Now this is a ball python. This animal is not going to be on the list, obviously. It's probably the best pet snake that you could keep, or one of. So today, let's talk about 5 terrible ones that you'd be surprised how many people actually want to have. I get messages all the time, hey, can I keep whatever, like just ridiculous requests. So today, let's go over why they're bad and better options. Number 5, African rock pythons. Now, giant snakes in general aren't great for most people. Not all people. I love giant snakes. If you have experience and if you are willing to take the risks involved, which are just like, if they bite you, it really sucks. And also if you have someone in the house with you or in the facility, whatever, in the room to handle just in case something goes sideways, then I think that they could be great pets. The problem is African rock pythons generally, in comparison to other big snakes, are not very fun at all. They're hissy, they're upset all the time, or that's the stereotype they get anyway. The more that they're bred in captivity, the more this will change and the less you're gonna see this. I think that as you breed species in captivity, they become more docile, especially because they're being handled from babies rather than wild-caught individuals brought in, and well, they're going to be a little bit more cantankerous than their captive bred counterparts. But I won't say that big snakes are bad. I would be a hypocrite. I love big snakes, but there's a better option. In my opinion, Burmese pythons, they look so similar. If you showed your mom, who's never seen, I don't know, if maybe you have a mom that does know snakes. If I showed my mom a Burmese python and an African rock python, she would never be able to tell the difference. The wild types anyway. They look very, very similar. They are similar sizes as well, but Burmese pythons do, on average, get a little bit bigger. African rock pythons are the largest snake in Africa, and Burmese pythons are, I think... The white street frogs always want to chime in when I'm filming. Okay. And Burmese pythons are from Asia, or Florida now, apparently. Because there's a bunch in the Everglades, if you didn't know. Now, the reason I think they're better is just simply because they're just a more placid animal most of the time. My Burmese pythons, when I take them out, I'm not really worried about them. Of course, it's always something to be cautious of. Any snake could get you. I mean, that's such a weird way to say it. Anything with a mouth can bite you, and Burmese pythons have big mouths, and they got a lot of teeth in those mouths. So be careful, but in my experience, they're just much more unlikely, or much less likely, English is hard, to bite you. And if you're a ball python person and you want to take a step up and want something much bigger, in my opinion, they act very similarly to ball pythons. Oh yeah, and they come in a bunch of morphs. Burmese pythons are freaking amazing. I love them. Number 4, Amazon tree boas. Now, Amazon tree boas, they are beautiful. I'll give you that. They are a slender snake that don't get too long, 5 to 7 feet on average, but they look so slender they always look underfed, but that's not the case. That's just the way that they are. And they come in some crazy colors that they might stay their entire life. So I understand why you'd want one. And if you want something that is just on display and you're barely ever gonna touch, barely ever gonna move, they're great. But if you want an animal that isn't going to try to bite you every time you open the cage, on average, of course, there are exceptions, I would recommend something a little bit different. And if you want something that's arboreal or semi-arboreal, I would recommend a spotted python or anything in the Antaresia family, so children's pythons, pygmy pythons, whatever. Or if you want something that is more arboreally, like arboreally enough for the arboreal club, then I would recommend something like maybe a vine snake. If you want something super slender, that's the thing that you're going after. Or if you really want a boa that is arboreal, then I would recommend an Amazon tree boa. No, I wouldn't. That's literally the thing I'm not recommending. An emerald tree boa. Now, also, it depends on what your budget is, because if you want an emerald tree boa, well, you're spending literally thousands of dollars. They're really expensive animals, especially if you want a basin, one of the bigger ones that's generally more placid, has the cooler pattern. All in all, I think that they're kind of similar. They're from a similar range. They have similar names. The thing is, they're going to be green with white speckling or white banding on the back, depending on where you get them from, their locality. And if you want something like a vine snake, Again, they're not going to be handleable at all, but they stay smaller. And I mean, although they're less likely to bite you, they'll still try to give it to you. And they're also rear fang venomous. So in my opinion, a spotted python is better. It's just they don't look similar at all or really act similar. I just think it's the best arboreal or semi-arboreal snake that you could possibly keep. And if you've been watching the channel for a while, you know I talk about spotted pythons too much. I love Jimmy. Jimmy's awesome. And there's morphs, right? Like, no, not a ton, but spotted pythons, in my opinion, are just a perfect size, something that usually gets 4 feet or less, although there are some monsters that get to 6 feet, 6-foot monster. But still, they're not dangerous. They're very unlikely to bite you in comparison. They're gonna hang out in the trees just as much. Overall, I just think spotted pythons are better, and they're really good eaters. They're just better. Spotted pythons are better. Number 3. Dragon snakes. Dragon snakes are a nightmare to keep in captivity for most people. Now, I know that someone's gonna say, oh, well, there's a breeder in Germany or wherever, right? There's a couple in Europe that are breeding these in captivity, but it's really rare. These are very difficult to breed in captivity, which means most of them available are wild caught, and we're gonna talk about that in the next entry. But generally, wild caught animals are an issue, or could be an issue more than captive. Not only that, but they're fragile snakes. They will eat things that usually you can't get your hands on, and they really often go off food, and that's just because they're fragile and they're picky. And you know, like those people who need like a fan blowing in a certain direction and a pillow between their knees and ankles in order to sleep, and the room has to be at a perfect temperature. Like, they're very particular. Well, dragon snakes are like that about staying alive. So if you're looking for an animal that will stay alive, I do not recommend at all a dragon snake. And not only that, they're semi-aquatic, which for some people is a plus, but for me, not so much. But this list isn't about you, Adam, so why don't we talk about something that'd be better that's semi-aquatic? Nerodia. Nerodia, so water snakes is what they are. They are North American colubrids. There are 9 species. Sometimes it's debated if it's 10 or 11, but 9 is generally recognized. These are fish eaters and amphibian eaters. So same sort of idea, but the difference is Nerodia aren't going to just die because they don't like the way you combed your hair that morning. These are much more hardy snakes, and there's much more captive breeding going on. Even like 3 or 4 years ago, there wasn't much captive breeding. Now I get messages all the time. Hey, if you ever want a water snake, I breed them. And that's like up here in Canada. In the US, you'll see that even more. Now, I don't know what it's like in Europe and overseas, right? And by overseas, I mean like anything that's over a sea comparison to here. But here in North America, they're very easy to find now. They're pretty cheap to find as well. And a lot of people are breeding them and handling them when they're young, so they're not super cantankerous like you'd normally see. Water snakes aren't known for being very handleable. Let's just put it like that. And you'd want a handleable one because if one of them wants to musk on you, their diet is fish and amphibians, so it stinks. Like, I've been musked on by wild water snakes and it is disgusting. But in terms of aquatic or semi-aquatic snakes, there are none better in my opinion than Nerodia. Just absolutely marvelous snakes. And although not the coolest looking, I think that their temperament and their disposition, the way they behave, is very interesting. Nerodia are awesome. Number 2, wild caught stuff. I'll keep this one short because it's obvious for some people, but if you're not aware, this is why. Wild caught animals generally, well, they're from the wild, so they have things that you'd get in the wild, like parasites. And if you bring a parasite into your collection, sometimes it can spread. And even if it doesn't spread to your other snakes or your other animals, it can really deteriorate the health of that animal. So if you do get wild caught, because there's certain animals that just captive bred isn't really an option, and I don't think that wild caught is always bad, but for the majority, I would say get a captive bred animal, so an animal that's bred in captivity rather than taken from the wild. But if you're getting a wild caught animal, there are certain things to think about. For example, make sure that you do a proper quarantine. So don't bring home, a garter snake that you found in the wild, which you shouldn't do anyway. Don't poach animals. But don't take an animal that you know is wild caught, put it in the same enclosure as one of your animals that's established, or even in the same room. Do a quarantine. If you don't know how to do that, I made a video on how to and why it's important. And I would recommend taking these animals to the vet, because a lot of the times they have internal parasites, and especially a lot of the times with things like even dart frogs, which are not snakes, I realize. If you get them, they're wild caught, they have worms, and they just don't do well. And the same thing can happen with snakes too. Another thing is you don't want external parasites, things like ticks or mites. If you get mites in a collection, especially this size, it is The reason I went bald is because I had mites in this collection one time and I ripped all my hair out. That's half true, but it'll make you rip your hair out. It's brutal. Filming with snakes is a lot of fun sometimes. Okay, come back here. And number one, this is probably obvious for a lot of people, HOTS. Venomous snakes. Now I'm talking about truly venomous, rear fang venomous snakes. Things like vipers, elapids, things like that. Now the one that I will include, because if you couldn't guess, the one that I'm going to suggest instead are rear fang venomous snakes. Except for one, boomslangs. Now I know someone's gonna comment, right? There's gonna be the 7 South African viewers I have. It's not pronounced boomslang, it's pronounced boomslang or whatever, right? I don't say it like that because I don't have a South African accent. The same reason I don't say mozzarella when I mean mozzarella, or say NASCAR when I mean NASCAR. It's appropriation. Do I look like the type of guy who would say off-color things? No. See what I mean? It doesn't matter which one you go to, they all pronounce like that. So anyway, a boomslang is an African snake. It's green, it's beautiful, hangs out in the trees, and it is rear fang venomous. But thanks to our buddy, Dr. Carl P. Schmidt, who got bit by one and then didn't seek medical attention. So what he did is he got bit by one and then started journaling and eating toast and then bleeding from his eyes. So anyway, don't do that if you get bit by a boomslang. But other rear fang venomous snakes, most of them, I'm talking about false water cobras, hognose snakes, garter snakes, they're not going to do a lot of damage if they do get you, unless you have an allergy. So I would recommend those if you want something dangerous because you need something venomous, but you don't want to die because you're smart. Now, with that said, I'm not crapping on people who keep venomous snakes. The Chandlers and Tyler Nolans and Dingoes, and those guys are experienced keepers. That's a different thing. I have no issue with what those guys do at all. I'm just saying most people shouldn't be going out and getting eyelash vipers or bushmasters. Crazy. Someone sent me a picture of a bushmaster they got last week. They're like 15. Like, how does this happen? Anyway, very obvious. Ruin your day, ruin your week, ruin your life. Give your parents a sick life insurance payout, whatever. Either way, I don't recommend venomous snakes. Instead, if you don't want something that is venomous at all, so you don't want a rear fang, then get yourself something like a Drymarchon. Now, the Drymarchon genus is a cool one, but most of the animals are pretty expensive. So if you want something like an Eastern Indigo or a Crebo, those animals are very smart, and in my experience talking to people who keep them, because I don't keep them myself and I don't keep venomous snakes, the correlation, the way that they act is very similar to some elapids. So I think this might be an option too. With that said, how did you like this list? Was this good? Do you like this list? Should I do one for lizards, the top 5 worst lizards and the best ones that you can get instead? Let me know in the comments section. Hit the like and subscribe if you don't mind. It really helps the channel. Thank you so much if you do. And as always, a special thank you to the Patreon supporters. For as little as $1 a month, you get discounts on the merch, which I'm not wearing because I forgot to change my shirt. You get videos early. You got to see a bunch of baby goats early last week. That was such a fun video to watch right here if you want to watch it. And so much more. So for as little as $1 a month, you can join the Patreon team. And I'm done flapping my gums. Because we do videos twice a week, that means I'll see you on Monday.